Everyone at this point is aware of one of the most popular issues in America today: guns, the Second Amendment, gun control. And from this, more concepts and issues are brought to attention. Things like education, political parties, and the power of the government. All of these things combine into a rising discussion that has been on the minds of young and old people alike. What should we be doing about the recent shootings? How do we prevent them? And what does this mean for our future, politically, economically, and socially? To begin, let's examine the viewpoints of some students from Somerville High School.
My name's Sam. I go to Somerville High School, and I happen to be a student.
My name is Baxter Ellard. I'm a sophomore at Somerville High School, and I was one of the lead organizers of the Somerville High School walkouts that took place between February 28th and April 11th, I believe. Yes, that was the last one. And I was also the person who photographed the whole event, so I captured it visually.
My name is Bennett Hazel. I'm a recently graduated senior at Somerville High School, and I work with teen empowerment as a mental wellness ambassador.
So what are your thoughts on the ongoing protests around gun laws?
I'm excited that something's being done by people of my generation. However, I also feel like it confirms this notion that issues don't truly matter unless it hits the right type of people, meaning that issues of gun violence have been happening in college communities for generations. However, it's not until suburban kids are murdered that's when our nation wants to mobilize this nation to get reform. And it's also the issue of, I want to think, if this happened at an urban, highly minority populated school, would we have known about it for one, and for two, would it have reached the same coverage? So it's a good thing. I think it also exposes the fact that we as a nation still have issues, ranking issues equally, rather than kind of providing priority to things that we view as national issues versus college issues.
I think it's great. I think it's a very, it's almost awe-inspiring seeing people come to such arms, even on both sides. Obviously, I have a bias, I have a side, but overall, with the whole just protesting in general and seeing so many people so adamant about this, it's really, I think it's great. And going towards where my bias is now, I think it's really amazing seeing how much support there is for these common sense gun laws. And just like, for example, March for Our Lives in DC, that was over 800,000 people attended that. It's the largest march in the history of the United States, and I think one of the largest in the history of the world. And just seeing that support, and also being at March for Our Lives Boston in front of 100,000 people, it's awe-inspiring, and it really makes me hopeful, because I see all these people that are so passionate about the issue and that want to see this change, and they're finally standing up and working towards it.
I think young people and students being inspired and engaging in activism is really inspiring. I think with March for Our Lives especially, you see that, but you also see that they're a little bit misguided in some of the things that they do. March for Our Lives is just, they're high school students. They're not trained in activism or politics, and so it's understandable that they will do things that are imperfect, that maybe don't gel with everybody's view on what this movement should be. Specifically, some of the stuff that I think March for Our Lives should not be doing, that they have been doing, is sharing military propaganda, working with law enforcement in ways that empower law enforcement, and this centering of the issue around mental health. Because I think people associate the problem around mass shootings with mental health, when that seems like a misconception, where the common thread between a lot of these mass shooters has not been mental health issues, has not been mental illnesses, it's been male entitlement. I think the danger around centering your platform that seeks out the root of gun violence and finds it in mental illness is that some of the things that the March for Our Lives protest has pushed for threaten the privacy of people with mental illnesses. They would make it easier for medical professionals to come to law enforcement with personal information about people with mental illnesses. And that violation of privacy, in my eyes, is very dangerous for mentally ill people. You also have to look at, if mental illness is really the problem here, because if it were, and we have so many people in the United States with mental health issues that aren't being addressed because of our garbage healthcare system, wouldn't you see more of those people being violent? And the reality is you don't see very many of those people being violent. You see more of those people being the victims of violence than violent. That's why you have to look elsewhere for the causes of gun violence and find them in men who have a skewed, entitled view of the world, who are violent towards the women in their lives before they're violent to the general public, and root that out as the cause of gun violence.
So do you think there should be any disciplinary action for walking out of school, and if so, what should it be and why?
I say yes only because protesting gains its power because you're sacrificing something, or you know that there's a consequence that you're getting, and because of this you're protesting to say that I don't care, I'm doing what's right, I'm doing what I believe in, and I'll take these consequences. So for us to get rid of the consequence, what would be the point of protesting? I mean, if nothing's going to happen. I think that it should count as what a normal skip would count, because I don't believe that should count as an absence because we're at school, we're clocked in. I think that should count as skipping.
So this was, when planning the Somerville High School walkouts, this was a topic that we worried about quite a bit actually, because nobody's going to do something if there's this severe punishment to it. Thankfully, we have the Somerville High School was very helpful. The administration was very cooperative in helping us plan this. But when it comes down to it, the teachers and the faculty's job at a school is to make sure you're there, that you're safe, and that you're in a learning environment. And us leaving the school is essentially violating that. Now, that's not me saying that we shouldn't. I think that you shouldn't get extra punishment for protesting. What we did for our protest, we walked out, we skipped class. So I think our punishment should have been nothing more than skipping class. Because if they did that, if they punished us for protesting, that's technically illegal. Yeah. That violates the First Amendment. And there were a few schools that tried to do that, and we had to get in contact with the ACLU a few times. Thankfully, we didn't have to go to like a full trial with any of those because it was resolved. But yeah, I think that the adequate disciplinary action should be nothing more than is specified by the school rule book.
But I think first of all, students should be able to walk out. That's a right that's been questioned in other schools in other states. Not here in Somerville as much, which is great. It's great that our administration has allowed students to walk out and has for the most part not punished them. But I think as a student who's walking out, you should expect to face the same consequences for walking out that you would for skipping school any other day. I think as a student, you shouldn't expect that your actions will not face consequences just because they are done in protest of something. I think that's part of the empowering thing about protest, is that you are going against the grain in some way.
Have you participated in any protests before, and which protests and why? And I guess, yeah, obviously the walking out of school counts as a protest.
I did the first walkout. I've been to the Women's March, and then I've also, I haven't been able to go to actually a Black Lives Matter rally, but however, I've been in support of them.
Mm-hmm. So why did you go to each of those, or why did you participate in each of those?
I helped the Black Lives Matter rally and issues such as One Somerville because they impact me. Even though I'm not an immigrant, my parents are, so hearing that our nation suddenly has these views towards immigrants affects them. I support the Black Lives Matter movement because I myself am brown, if you didn't notice. So issues faced by these marginalized groups are issues that I face daily, and depending on where I live, my experiences with racism is going to shift. Mm-hmm. And then the Students Against Gun Violence, because I believe that if I'm old enough to be shot, then I'm old enough to have an opinion about being shot.
So yeah, I was at every single one of the student walkouts at Somerville High School, and what exactly those were every Wednesday. We called it Walkout Wednesday. It is a weekly protest where every Wednesday we walk out of school and we go do some sort of activism to protest the horrific trend of gun violence in our country and advocate for the passing of more common sense gun laws in Massachusetts specifically. And what we were advocating for was the ERPO bill, which stands for Extreme Risk Protective Order. And what that does is it allows family members or loved ones to file what are called ERPOs against other family or loved ones that they believe are a risk to themselves or others. And once that order is filed, then they have their guns are taken away from them for 10 days just to start, and they get they are taken to court and they're evaluated. Their situation is evaluated to see if they are really a risk, a dangerous risk to themselves or to other people. And then if they are deemed that ban can be extended to up to a year. For example, the Parkland shooter, he had shown signs of being definitely not stable and dangerous for months in advance of his of the shooting. And with an extreme risk protective order, someone could see this and they could file it and make sure that he did not have access to the weapons that he used to kill 17 people. To see like all of these young people advocating for what they believe in and what they think is right, and what I also think is right. And just really, instead of just sitting around like so many people, like the generations before have done a lot of, we really just took up arms and advocated for this one thing. And it's just, I'm very proud of the work that my peers and everybody has done on this, and just what everybody's put into it. And it's like paying off, and it gives me sort of hope for the future as for the next generation.
I participated in the first walkout that happened at Somerville High, and I did that mostly because I appreciated the visual, the optics of what that walkout would be, because there was a lot of press there. There were a lot of articles that came out of that walkout, and I thought the visual of having that many students lined up outside the school was a good visual, and I wanted to be a body in that crowd because I thought that would be the easiest way to help. And that walkout happened at a time when my views on the movement as a whole hadn't really cemented yet, and I kind of knew that. I kind of didn't know how in support of March for Our Lives I was, and so I did what I thought I could safely.
So what would you want to tell someone about current gun laws? Maybe something that they didn't know, something that you want to bring to light, or something that, yeah, again, just doesn't have enough, enough of a spotlight on it.
I'd say, I think that's amazing that we're working in Massachusetts to help create stricter gun laws. However, I think that we need to focus on other places, like Florida, for example, has the stand your rights, stand your ground laws, meaning that if you enter someone's home, they have the right to shoot you, and there won't be any form of consequences against it. And I think that's something interesting. People don't know about Florida. However, I used to live there, and I know that moving here, it's like this doesn't exist. I also think that we need to think that, yes, stricter gun laws is a good thing, but in these urban regions where people are getting guns illegally, how are we going to impact them by creating stricter gun laws if they're still buying these guns illegally? It's not going to affect marginalized people in the way that we'd like it to, so I think it's also something to note when we're advocating for stricter gun laws. Who is it going to affect, and why is it going to affect these people?
So I'll talk more about on the Massachusetts state level. Massachusetts has the lowest rates of gun deaths in the entire nation, and it also has the strictest gun laws. We have an assault rifle ban. We have a lot of very good legislation that's put into place to protect people from the issues of gun violence, and to make sure that guns don't get into the wrong hands. What we need to focus on now is the federal level which has done less than nothing. For a group of people who are so focused on short term, it seems like everybody in Congress wants to focus on something that'll be only effective in a more long-term situation when it comes to training a whole thousands and thousands, probably, I'm not sure how many teachers there are in the United States, but it's definitely in the hundreds of thousands. Training all of these people, funding all of that training, and also giving them all of the firearms that they're trying to arm them with, and then hoping that it works. Like, I think that if you, I mean, it might work if you give them the proper training, but it just seems like a nonsense solution for me. It's easier to solve the issue by making it more difficult for the criminals to get the guns than it is to make it more difficult for the criminals to respond to retaliation. I think one more thing I want to address is when it comes to the Massachusetts gun laws, we have very strict and good gun control that works, and people who want guns, they can still get guns provided that they are not a risk. We have the measures to make sure that people who are at risk do not get guns, essentially. Massachusetts is doing very well, but we need to shift our focus to states around us right now that are basically those tunnel states.
I'd first of all say that it's important for people to be able to have guns. It's important for people to be able to present themselves as a threat, because sometimes that presentation of yourself as a threat is something that can save a life. And that's why the Second Amendment is important. At the same time, there need to be barriers and restrictions for people to be able to acquire firearms, whether you're a citizen or whether you're law enforcement. I think if I were to tell any person one thing about gun laws today, it's that the conversation needs to include the demilitarization of the police. That's something that can't be left out. The other thing that can't be left out is gun violence that is systemic in impoverished areas with a lot of low-income and marginalized families, because that is something that people have been speaking about for decades and has largely been ignored, because politicians and America as a whole has established that they don't really listen to people of color, and that needs to change.
So what advice would you have for someone who's planning to walk out or protest, specifically in terms of these, like these gun protests, like these school walkouts?
I'd say for the school walkouts, think about whether or not you can stay at school, because yes, it's an amazing thing to be a part of, but I think we also have to know that there are cultural differences within the high school, and some students just don't come from parents who would even allow them to leave school for a second, unless walk out. So I think that, for one, don't feel pressure to do it just because other kids are doing it, and for two, don't pressure other kids to do it, because I may not walk out because I may not be able to afford it grade-wise, and my parents may not approve of it. And while it'd be an amazing thing to go against it, many people just can't.
I would say find a group of people that you are willing to work with. Find a group of people that are passionate about it. But then at the same time, don't be so exclusive that you totally ignore everybody else's opinion. I think if you really want to get stuff done, you need to find that core group that is willing to do the work. If you rely instead on getting the masses of, if in a school setting, if you rely instead on having meetings with everybody can come every week, then it's just going to be a bunch of bickering between too many opinions, and then not much is going to get done.
I'd say if you're a Somerville High School student and you're planning on walking out, be an ally, leverage your privilege to give people who have not had a platform to speak and need one that platform. That's the main thing.